Hello. While we wait for everyone to join, we had a great icebreaker back during our October summit, and I've been enjoying stealing it. So I'm going to ask you both, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up? So, Chris, let's start with you. What did you want to be?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I have to acknowledge that I don't remember, but what I do remember
Mhm.
is what my parents told me I should probably be when I grow up, which was at the time they said a lawyer because all I could do is ever argue. So,
Yeah.
I back then I think it's not quite a compliment, but now I just look at this and says I was persistent, right? It's a great character trait to be persistent. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I
I
love
I
it.
think when I was little, I thought that I was gonna grow up to be a doctor, which I think is kind of related to selling, diagnosing. You're kind of like uncovering pain and kind of persuading people to do the right thing to kind of help themselves resolve that. So kind of got there, but more like a commercial doctor, if you will.
I love that. I love that. I always talk about, people self-prescribing and diagnosing. I mean, things we talk about in selling. So I love it, Pete.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
All right. I love learning those things about people. I think it's so much fun. All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on your location, and welcome to our digital event, Let's Meet IRL, the role of hybrid selling in 2022. So, for some background for you all, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission here at MSP is to create an environment for our 20K and growing members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own, as well as to help them see around corners. We do that through great live sessions, like what you're about to experience today, through our robust online forum, and in the near future, in-person events. Those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. But if you do not, please don't hesitate to drop our team a note via modernsaleshq.com, and we'll be happy to help you out. Now, today's event is sponsored by the folks at D&B. Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about you all and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, at D&B, our mission is really to help companies grow and thrive. We have over 420 million records globally in our data cloud, and we use that to
Wow.
empower sales and marketing organizations to target, reach, and engage with the right audiences who are most likely to convert through both offline and online channels. And speaking of that online piece, check the news. We just announced a couple of acquisitions today, which is pretty exciting for us at D&B, specifically a definitive
What?
agreement to acquire IOTA as well as NetWise. So very exciting for us.
Huh. Wow. Crazy. More things for your team to cross sell, Chris. Jeez.
Oh yeah, that's super exciting, right? And again, like doubling down in the digital space, like truly empowering, omni-channel, pretty exciting stuff for us at D&B.
Yep.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for being here when you have so much going on. We really appreciate it.
Oh,
Today's
it's my pleasure.
is Let's Meet IRL, the role of hybrid selling in 2022. For today's event, we have our moderator, Pete Kazanji, and our speaker, Chris Garza. Chris, will you please tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're so interested in this topic? We'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in sales leadership for, it's about 15 years now. I've led sales teams in the inside space. I've carried a bag, right? Always important for sales leaders to have carried a bag themselves as a rep. I've led field teams and strategic sales teams, right? Now my team works with some of our largest customers at D&B. But look, sales is what I love. It's a passion. And it's right up there with like craft beer, which is a pretty big deal, and the Texas Longhorns, which you can probably see in my background here, big Texas Longhorns fan. But I don't know if that quite makes me more relevant for sales. But yeah, look, sales is a passion of mine. I've done it for a while. Going back to what Pete said, right? Helping organizations solve problems and helping diagnose what the issues are and helping get those solved is a passion of mine.
Great. Well, we are happy to have you here today. Pete, tell us about yourself.
Sure. My name is Pete Kazanji. I'm the co-founder and CRO at Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that helps managers, so AE managers, SDR managers, AM, CSM managers use data to better measure and improve team performance. And I'm also the founder of Atrium, of Modern Sales Pros. I think I'm really super excited about this topic. And I forget, Elizabeth, how do you pronounce does IRL stands for in real life? Is that what it stands for?
Yep, in real life.
Got it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I thought so, but I barely figured out how to use emojis recently. So I gotta make sure I'm down with the hipness. Yeah, I'm just super fascinated. So at Atrium, we work with sales organizations. So we have a few hundred customers who have all different types of sales motions. And so watching them modify their sales motion over the last 18 months or 24 months or what have you has been really fascinating. And then also as the person who, I have an 8-person AE team that used to be inside. So 4-person SDR team or 5-person SDR team, 8-person AE team that used to be inside, kind of standard mid-market sales, sales org, inside sales org, kind of like the one that Chris ran 2 jobs ago versus his outside, and so as a practitioner, I'm really kind of fascinated by this as well, both from a teaching and a learning standpoint for the reps, but then also how you can use offline engagement to help close business as well. And I think I'm just super pumped about this topic because I think there's a lot of wobbly stuff going on right now, and we're all just trying to figure it out. And I think over the last period, what's been great is a lot of cool things have been revealed to us that we're probably going to persist going forward. And then, but mixing with the stuff we used to do and kind of in a 1 + 1 = 3 sort of situation. So I'm pumped to geek out on this because, I think about this stuff a lot.
Should be a great conversation. Now, before we dive in, just some quick housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access this recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if you have a question for Chris, please use the Q&A function. We want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the chat. You'll see me in there a lot. So this way we can try to get to all of your questions during the event. I'm sure you'll have a lot. Don't be shy. Keep them coming. Now for our agenda, we are going to be talking remote to hybrid. What does it mean to go in person again? And what does the balance between in-person and online look like? Digital transformation. A lot of money was invested in digital channels. So what does your foot traffic look like in the digital realm? And will the rapid growth keep up? And finally, events as a lead source. What is the process for returning to in-person when organizations have been fortifying their digital strategy and building out their tech stack? Now, enough from me. I am going to pass this off to Pete and Chris.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess we'll start with kind of the first topic here around remote to hybrid. Chris, when you're thinking about your team and what your customers are doing, what does that look like for you guys to go in person again? And how does the balance of in person and online, how does that look for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big one, isn't it, Pete? I guess kind of starting out, I think the interesting thing here is that, everyone's been taken outside of their comfort zone, and I get it, right? You had field sellers here that are now forced to sell on the phone and become virtual. You got inside sellers that are forced to actually go virtual. And I think the inside sales that are forced to go virtual, that's actually something I don't feel like it's been talked about a lot. I think there's been a lot of conversation about, field sellers and not being able to get out and see your customers and what does that mean? And is it a different skill set? But I also haven't heard a ton about what does this mean for an inside seller as well, right? Having led, inside field and kind of your strategic type of sellers, I think that it's also interesting because you have people that are used to operating, holistically on the phone, kind of behind the black curtain and not going video.
Yeah,
And like, is there now an expectation, even if you're an inside seller, that you're turning on video? Like, depending on who you're working with and who you're actually selling into, even SDRs, if you're doing, a lot of phone engagement, that's an interesting one because you have inside sellers that don't have necessarily the skill set to or aren't used to reading body language or understanding what should I
sure.
be paying attention to. Like those are the things that the field sellers have traditionally been used to looking at. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the inside seller thing is really interesting. Less from a yes, get what you're saying vis-a-vis the selling behavior. The thing that I think has been fascinating there has been um, the because usually those inside sellers oftentimes are more junior, right? So you get these,
Mm-hmm.
SDRs are like 20 something, kind of like late 20 something AEs, and so now they're being kind of forced to work from home in an environment where you don't hear your neighbor on the phone, right? You don't hear, and so I think one of the things that I've observed that's been really powerful is, or like, I think there have been serious challenges around that, and we can say like, oh, well, we all have like Gong or Chorus or fill in the blank, but I think the reality is that like the amount of time that managers are able to allocate in order to like listen to calls ends up being very challenging because like you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
single threaded on that versus like a manager sitting on the sales floor kind of do an email or whatever and kind of like organically hears these things. And we've seen it quite a bit that there's been some pretty like substantial messaging drift along with some of our reps where like you jump on a call with a rep a month later and you're like, whoa, you're like skipping all these disco questions
Yeah.
and like it's checklisted right here, like what the hell is going on here? It's just like, oh man, I didn't even realize. And I think so one of the ways that we've been kind of contending with that is having folks kind of come back to, we still have our office in San Francisco, having folks come into the office for like office weeks. We're actually having one right now where folks are just like there next to each other, listening to each other. It obviously helps with like interpersonal cohesion as well.
Yeah, for
But that's
sure.
been something that's been really really helpful. Like how my team has historically been, it's inside, so there's less like client entertainment. I mean, here or
Mm-hmm.
there, but it's less like travel and things like that. How has that been changing for you as things are kind of like getting more normally?
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because I think I was on again Modern Sales Pros talking to this audience and having a chat a few months ago, and my perspective at the time was it looks like things are starting to open up. I mean, from what I can see, my sellers are coming to me and saying, hey, customers want to see me. They're really excited, right? They want to do what they love. They want to go sell. They want to sell in person. It's
Yeah.
what they're used to doing, and was it but maybe a few days, maybe a week later that the whole Delta thing hit. And it's like, well, wait a minute, suddenly all those requests started to slow down and get canceled. And, here we are now. It's interesting. I mean, I think there's the release, of course, of the vaccine for 5 to 11. Like, you start to look at this and go, what's that going to do? I mean, my perspective here is that this can't necessarily be top down, right? This can't be top down. I mean, the good news is that I'm starting to see, again, customers want to see, team members. They're asking, can you guys come in for an in meeting? There was an in-person meeting here in Austin, a week ago, and it was like the first one in a year and a half for the seller. And the feedback from the customers, wow, it was so great to be able to see in person and to be able to go through this and get on a whiteboard and draw on a whiteboard, and
Yeah.
how much more effective it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really going to be down to individual sellers, discretion and decision. It's like customers
Yeah.
want to see sellers. For the sellers who want to go out and have that conversation, I think organizations are going to encourage it to a certain extent, but then you kind of have this like dichotomy, because when you think about it, CFOs have gotten used to now keeping that T&E budget low, and they like
Yeah.
putting that money back in their pocket. I don't think they want to give it back, or at least not to the extent that they had been giving it back in the past. So, I think that's going to be the interesting thing. But, I think ultimately the tipping point is, when a seller loses a deal, especially a big deal, because a competitor was there in person and they weren't, like, I think at that point in time, like alarm bells go off, like, things are going to happen. The CFO is going to go, okay, I'm trying to play for efficiency and low cost, but how do I strike that balance?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's just like, yeah, the CFOs used to bringing that, like, keeping that budget low. It's like, yeah, it's all fun and games until it hits win rates, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
then it's a problem. Yeah, I think what we've been doing there, it's at least what I've been doing with my team is, and like we didn't, because our ASP is, you know, very mid-markety, right? Like, 20K or whatever. So there's not a lot of like flying places. But what has been cool is it's a little bit more of like a read option kind of situation
Mhm.
here. Like, is the rep is like, they can do virtual engagement or entertaining, um, which is not nearly as much fun or cohesive as like, yeah, let's get a beer, right? But you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do like virtual beers. One of the things we've done before is there's a fun little service called Cocktail Courier,
Hmm.
um, that you can kind of like send somebody a kit, right? It's like a not like a huge thing of booze. It'll be like a
Yeah,
like
a little
a
something.
little one. Or whatever. But what's nice about it is it's got like all the different kind of like trappings to like make a bougie cocktail or whatever, and so you can send it
Yeah.
over there. Like, it's not cheap, right? But like, of course, taking somebody out to drinks or whatever, it's going to be like, $100 all in or whatever. So, 100, 150. So like in this case, it's kind of a similar thing, and you can have like a drink with somebody over Zoom. Um, Again, not nearly as much fun as like sitting next to
Yeah.
them at the bar or whatever, right? Like, but then like having that in their back pocket can be nice. But then we actually just had this the other day with one of a bigger client of ours. For whatever reason, he kind of came into one of our points of contact, came into town to San Francisco for like a
Hmm.
marketing leadership meeting or whatever, and he and like we got wind of it, and we're like, oh well, like we'll take you out, like let's go.
Hmm.
And like and the way that we approached that was like, oh, if you're open to it, we would love to take you out, right? Not kind of like,
Yeah.
hey, like just kind of like reading the room, right?
Yeah,
Like,
for
hey, are you
sure, for
cool?
sure.
Are you cool? Like, it's okay to say no. Like, I don't want you to be like, to be grumped out on this or whatever. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And like, we took him out and got a bunch of margaritas out on a patio, and he was
Nice.
super juiced, and the AE was stoked, as well. And so I think that that's kind of like a move that you can do,
Yes.
right? That's and I think that's probably like an example of how you're like, hopefully what's going to happen is we're going to persist like the best of some of this digital stuff, right?
Hmm.
To But then to like merge with the kind of like older school, if you will, or like more traditional offline stuff, which I think actually is
Yeah.
something that is a topic that we wanted to talk about a little bit here, which is, I think over the last like 18 to 24 months, a lot of people have invested a ton of resources in digital channels. Um, and so I think the question there is like, what happens with those over the
Yeah.
coming 12 to 18 months? Do we end up with like all of these like empty virtual conference halls, or like how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. That's an interesting one, right? I think it's, what we've seen certainly is a proliferation of the MarTech stack. I mean, you've got now all these technologies that are in place. I mean, look, it happened to everybody at the same time. Where, I mean, good
I
example
know.
on the consumer side, right? Well, like restaurants, right? Restaurants, they
Oh,
had to pivot or fail. Like their survival depended
oh
on
yeah.
their ability to go digital like overnight, and that
Yep.
means delivery. It means e-com, online ordering. It means getting the word out of what they're doing. It means updating their website. Like, think about what those sales cycles look like. Some seller was at the other end of those sales cycles going, hell yeah, like, keep bringing it in, right? But,
That's right. We had a couple of customers that were COVID beneficiaries like that,
yeah,
and you could totally see it in their stats. You were just like, oh man, these sellers are pumped.
yeah. I mean, but you think about it, like as fast as those sales cycles happened, like how much due diligence do you think went into those sales cycles? Like how many options were evaluated during that cycle? Like, it was probably how fast can you get me up and running? To check the main boxes, ready, set, go, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing now is, you've got all these technologies that are in the stack. And, look, I think the first thing from my perspective is, make sure that you're all over your renewals. Like if you're in that space, if you're, in the MarTech stack, if you're, if someone had to move very quickly, make sure you understand those customers, you stay close to those customers, because I can, almost guarantee you there's some due diligence that's happening right now associated with some of those buys to understand, did I make a good buy? Are there other options I should be considering? What else should I be thinking about in this space? And that's actually a trend that I've personally seen is providers that are looking for that type of consolidation. So, how can they simplify the stack? How can they take something that's very complex and has arrows and diagrams, go in every direction, and maybe consolidate a few of those arrows and boxes into one big circle to simplify and drive lift. So, that's the other piece of this. Not only if you're the incumbent, you got to be aware, but for those who are not the incumbent, you have an opportunity here to go in and steal a bigger piece of the pie and a bigger part of the share.
Yeah, I think that what I've kind of observed, I like the way that you kind of point, like the restaurants are a good example. It was like, holy mackerel, in order for us to stay alive. But the same was true with like the marketing organizations too. It's just like, cool, I still have to generate pipe, right? And figure and like my events component of that has kind of vaporized. And I think the thing that's interesting there is that a lot of folks kind of got thrown into the deep end of the pool and like, oh, well, like we need to start doing digital events. And a lot of them were like really bad.
Yeah, I mean, people are learning, right, man? It's true though.
Yeah, but I think you're gonna have these situations where like the folks that prioritized it and decided to get good at it, that'll persist. And for other folks where they're kind of like halfway in, halfway out, that's where you'll probably see that falling by the wayside. Like I see this a lot with because I end up like doing a lot of speaking on some of our customers' webinars and what have you. And you'll just kind of see it where it's just like, really, is that that's the attendee count? And so I think what's gonna my hypothesis is that what will happen is the stuff that's like working well, right? People will persist with. Like, I'll give you a really kind of tactical example here. We're a big customer of a company called Sendoso. Allows you to send kind of like physical stuff to prospects, right? And customers too. So like, I mean, we've gotten like crazy with it because like now you can't go see him live or whatever, but you can redirect some of that engagement to that. And so we've gotten like deeper and deeper and deeper in how we do that. And we do like more pipe gen stuff around that as well, around like, hey, take a meeting with Atrium and we'll send you a sales management book and or a couple sales management books and like a cool Yeti or whatever. And like that works really well. And the reason why it works well is because like it's like it doesn't require a lot of like coordination and like fancy footwork, like putting together a really smoking event what like means a bunch of content design and like promotion and so on and so forth. So I think the stuff that's like that doesn't require a lot of coordination, I think will continue to will continue to do great there, in alignment with the resurgence of kind of like offline stuff. So you'll see more events happening, and then they'll get hit as a follow-up from that event with like a physical send or something like that.
Right? Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. I mean, and there's even another angle of this, right? Which is, thinking about, digital transformation, right? Companies were forced to take action, right, to survive, both on the consumer side and on the B2B side. But on top of that, of course, that means that more is happening digitally, right? So now, those offline channels are not as powerful and everything's being driven to a website or being driven, digitally. Like, there's more display advertising, there's more people reading content, online, like all of that stuff is just happening more, which really means that there's also more signal data, right? So you start to think about how do you potentially take advantage of that, right? Like how can you look at this trend and look at this as something that, might be able to give you a competitive advantage? And, that's one of the things that has become, pretty interesting, especially to us as a data organization. Like, signal data matters, right? Looking at, for example, is a company hitting your website, right? Are they showing first party intent by, going to your website
Right.
and they didn't fill out a lead form, right? They didn't chat in, but they just hit the website, they're poking around, reading some content. Like, how do you understand or de-anonymize that traffic to understand who's hitting it? And if, for example, there's an open opportunity in the system already, and now this organization is hitting your website, like that could be pretty interesting. What does that mean? And is there third-party intent data that's out there, meaning that this organization is also doing research on a category or on a topic that's very relevant to what you provide? Like, how can you start to leverage some of this signal data, like bring it all in, right? The first-party intent, the third-party intent, technographic data, looking at the install base, and aggregate it in one place to make it actionable to a seller, right? As opposed to just it, going somewhere. And that's a really interesting opportunity. And I've started to see more organizations want to take advantage of that type of data to drive a difference against their competition.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because if you think about, like, the problem is that, like, as sellers, it's funny, like as sellers, we have this issue when we engage with prospects. Like, we can reveal pain to them, right? And like, connect it to negative implications and, positive business outcomes and things like that. But if it's not like in the top priority, right? If it's not in the top 3 or whatever, it's like, yeah, my toe hurts, but like, man, my
How
like
bad?
my thumb, I like cut off my thumb, right? It's like, gotta deal with this one first. And so I think what's fascinating is that the last like 18 months have given a little bit of like breathing room, if you will, because it's taken some of those things that normally would have been like, all right, we got to do, we're doing this amount of traveling, we're doing these offline events and what have you. And it's kind of compelled people to get a little bit smarter around things that otherwise might have been like deprioritized. Like, oh yeah, like signal intent data is something like, oh, I've always been meaning to get around to it, but it's always kind of been one of those things. And now it's like, oh wow, this is now something that's more like table stakesy, right? And so I think what you could imagine is when those blend together, like, oh hey, because now we've gotten the taste of blood with respect to signal and intent data, and then we use that not just for like calling in from a BDR standpoint or whatever, but we're calling in there and inviting them to a dinner because we're going to be in town, because we're going to be in Chicago next week, right? Maybe Chicago's a bad example because we're going into winter here, but like, hey, we're gonna be in Austin, right? For Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and gonna have some people together. If you're open to joining, it's gonna be a great group of folks. And so like, I think what we're gonna see is more of that like blending of the stuff that we've figured out over the last 18 to 24 months with the like tried and true. Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. Right. And it's interesting. It's like, we've seen lots of, activity and lots of interest in signal data, but then the other thing, to your point, like the same conversation though, is like AI and ML. I mean, that's like the super hot thing. It's the fun thing to talk about, but it's also, can be really complicated. And especially for, smaller organizations that maybe don't have like full-time data science organizations. It's almost, where do I start? And like, that's too data sciencey, and like, I don't have people who do data science. And how do I take advantage of some of the benefits of, those types of things? But again, with the increase of digital exhaust data and things that are happening, like there's more data that you can use to, at the end of the day, help sellers work smarter, not harder, right? Plenty of sellers work plenty hard, and a lot of it's about how do we help them work smarter by maybe, doing some things behind the scenes to help them prioritize leads coming in. And instead of just looking at, okay, yeah, I know that this is a good persona, that came in terms of the lead. I sell well to this persona, and yes, this is in the right industry and it's the right size. Okay, I'm going to call them. Start to understand, like, what else could you layer on there to say, are they even in market to buy? Do they care right now? Like, how can we look at the intersection of fit and intent to understand true engagement as opposed to just evaluating the fit aspect of it? D&B has some tools, to help with that, but other organizations do as well. At the end of the day, it's, how can you make this more accessible? How can you democratize AI, ML, and is there a tool like D&B's RevUp ABX that allows you to skin in a very user-friendly way the ability to take advantage of some of this if you don't have full-time data scientists on staff?
Right. I mean, I don't.
Yeah. Well, we're a data company, so we got lots of them.
Oh, I would, yeah, exactly. And you rent them out in the form of the products, conveniently enough. Yeah. So I think that we're kind of talking about in the first section this notion of like reps doing kind of doing this stuff around the edges, kind of making like micro events or like micro engagements or what have you. But like, what about like actual events? And then, like, what do you think? How do you see folks kind of doing those,
Yeah.
showing up, and then how does that kind of mix with their digital strategy that's kind of like ballooned over the last 18 months or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first part of the question is like, again, events and like micro events, good example. I mean, these things are important in the context of, yes, selling, right? Kind of what we're here to talk about, but they're also really, really important in the context of team building, which is also selling, right? It's incredibly important to, the top line that you're trying to drive, to have team members who are engaged and feel valued and who are appreciated. So I guess there's multiple aspects to this. I mean, I was on a wine tasting event that we did. We got a winery called 36 Winery to do a wine tasting, and we drop shipped a really nice Chardonnay and a really nice red. And I showed my hand earlier that I'm a craft beer guy and know very little about wine. Yeah. So it was a red. I don't remember what kind of red it was.
It was red. It was wet. Tasted like wine.
Exactly. And we had a good chat, right? We talked a little bit about what was top of mind for them in the space, and it was a great opportunity to bond with customers and to have as close to a face-to-face as we're going to have in that type of scenario. So I think those types of things are really important, but it's also, how do you set things like that up with your team? And I can tell you that one of the customers that was in that session actually told me about a really cool thing she's done with her team that I'm about to book with my team, which is, it's what did she call it? A digital escape room. Now, I have no idea how this works, but she said like there's a person with a GoPro or something like looking around, and I guess you guide them, or it sounds logistically like a mess if I'm being honest, but she said it was phenomenally fun and the team really enjoyed it.
We'll see how it shakes out. I think I actually have heard of a couple of folks doing that, like those digital escape rooms. Yeah, I think that's like the theme there, is that and this is something that we think about a lot at MSP, because like MSP, like we started out doing only IRL in real life events,
Sure.
because we would do these we call them salons, because that's like, it's a fancier version of a meetup where you had these like roundtable discussions. You'd have like 50 or 100 or 150 or 200 people, at like 8 people around a table kind of going through topics, and people like loved it because like you get the in-person connection. It's kind of like a stitch and bitch situation a little bit too. People are kind of like kvetching about like their their problems. It's like, it's like super cathartic, right? And then the funny thing is that like, because mirroring those online, like kind of taking like the way that I kind of describe it is digital events that feel like real events
Yeah.
end up being the ones that like really sing. Like it's funny because like you and I are, you know, having a talking heads conversation, albeit on a very good topic right now and with very good insights. But like this sort of event right here is, you know, it's not like, this is not nearly as compelling as like a roundtable conversation,
Of
especially
course.
with a little bit of craft beer involved or a little bit of wine.
Absolutely.
And I think, yeah, and I think that what organizations have been doing, and I know that actually we've been doing this, like our modern sales teams have been doing a ton of those. We call them wind downs. It's like the cutest name ever.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what we called
yeah,
ours too.
where you nice, where you have like 20 people, right? And they're all just, and like you can go in little breakout rooms or whatever. So I think like the more folks can kind of do things like that, like I can imagine doing that, like that that digital escape room. Like you can imagine doing it as a team building exercise, but you could also imagine doing something like that with like a client,
Yeah, that could be really
right?
cool. I completely agree. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Just the more it can be like a real thing versus just like, oh yeah, more talking heads, sweet.
yeah, I know. I know. Look, it's true. I mean, in my mind, it's trying to, help people understand that you're a human being. And that sounds dumb at some levels, but trying to humanize and drive some authenticity. And I mean, there's even little things. I mean, look, how do you recreate like the hallway conversations when you're an outside seller? Well, it's damn near
Yeah.
impossible, right? Call it what it is. But one of the things that I've typically done, and it's you see it right now. Like I don't actually use the mocked up backgrounds, and that's a conscious choice. And
Yeah.
believe it or not, in
Yeah.
my mind, this is also. I mean, granted, I don't want anything crazy in the background, right? So I understand some people need to
Well,
use them, but
when we were talking earlier, I was like, dude, your lamp is amazing. You're like, oh
yeah,
yeah,
look,
Longhorns. Oh, you in Austin?
that's it. Like that's the reason why, Pete. I mean, look, I want people to
Yeah.
see me as another person at the other end of not the phone anymore, right? Or not the end of other end of a table, but at the other end of a video computer camera, I guess, at least for the time being, who is
Yeah.
genuinely interested in helping them accomplish their goals and solving their problems. And that's the way I want customers to see my sellers and my team members. So even something as
Yeah.
nuanced or small as showing my background, someone might, like you, Pete, might say, hey, really cool lamp, or hey, are you in Austin, or what's the football on your desk back there, or just little things
What
to
is the
help.
football? I was gonna
Yeah.
ask you that. What is the football on your desk?
Yeah, so I was able to get a signed football from Priest Holmes, which used to play
Oh
for
wow.
Texas, back in the day. It's not Vince Young, which it's becoming, but it's cool. My dad actually got it for me. He ran into Priest Holmes somewhere, met him, and was able to get a signed ball. So I appreciated it. And it goes very well with the rest of my memorabilia in my office. Focused on the
Yeah.
horns.
I think, and we'll shift gears here in a second to talk about like actual offline events. But I think that what you just described right there is exactly right, which is the reason why offline events, whether they're like micro events, like having dinner with somebody, or like, a round table, or, a kind of full throated marketing event or whatever, are compelling, is because you can make authentic connections. And so
Yeah,
to the extent that we can drive that as much as possible in the online world, the better off we are. So like in your case, you're talking about making it very easy for somebody to like have conversation starters, or kind of like little like handholds, right? To like,
that's right.
rock climbing handholds. And then it's funny, I was having this Twitter conversation with some folks, like, I don't know, it was like couple weeks ago or whatever. I was talking about like helping reps be really amazing at Zoom. And someone brought up a really good point around things audio, like audio cohesion, lighting. And it was actually funny because the MSP team, I do a bunch of these events, and one of them, I think it actually was Hannah, was like, dude, you're too dark. We need to get you a diva light. and, and I was like, what? Like, do I need to do makeup next? But she was right, right? And
Yeah.
and so what? And then what? I like popped on Amazon, and I found the most, like, I just looked for like the best one with like the highest
Yeah.
ratings, with the middling price or whatever, right? And now like all of our AEs have those diva lights, and like it really helps. right? So I think that that's just, yeah, using that as a kind of like the to make the online as like the offline as possible can really facilitate that. When I think about like for realsies events, I think like people really do, like people are super starved for like actual in real life connection. And so the way that I've kind of seen organizations doing that is it's kind of like accretive, right? Or like emergent, kind
Mm-hmm.
of like bottoms up. We're talking about it on a rep basis where, oh, you're coming into town, great. But then you can imagine like the little bigger way of doing that is, hey, I'm coming into town, right? I'm coming into
Absolutely.
town. I'm gonna get a table, outdoors at blah blah blah. Love if you like if you're into it, come on and join. And it's like lower risk, right? Because it's like versus, hey, we're gonna rent out a
Yeah, for sure.
hotel, like a hotel ballroom or whatever. In this case, it's kind of like, okay, here's like worst case scenario, I have like a $2,000 minimum or
Yeah.
whatever for the restaurant, and if like nobody shows up, I'll just take it home and it's like wine, I guess, or
Yeah.
or whatever, and like bring it to the team. But I think and then what you can kind of do is like build up from there, like, oh wow, that really worked well for our clientele, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's also probably sales motion specific as well. Like if you're selling to younger folks, they're probably going to be like, all about it, right? Like if you sell into like food and bev, people are going to be like,
Hmm.
yeah, I work out all the time, so like of course, right? Like sounds awesome, right? So I think by like kind of doing those experiments around the edges, what people will be able to do is figure out like what works for them in that given time period, because like things will change in like 90 days or 180 days or whatever. But I think the thing that will be like problematic for folks, or people will kind of be disappointed, is if they try to do something really 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 big from a top down
Yeah.
standpoint. Might work out, right? It might work out, but like you might also just be caught with your pants down.
High risk, man. I completely agree, Pete. I mean, look, this is we're not there yet, right? We're not quite there yet. I think I've seen some medium-sized events start to come back, right? But to your point, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess high risk, high reward, maybe. As long as the reward is high, it's definitely high risk because you may lose a bunch of money. But maybe
I
you're
would
going to get
like
some great
ladder
leads.
Yeah, I would ladder up though, right? Like you could totally imagine doing like, I think you said you're like West Coast, right? And if you had a
Yeah.
you have the West, so you can imagine a rep say like, hey, I'm gonna do a San Francisco tour, I'm gonna do a LA tour, and like it turns out that it works fine, then like maybe in 2 weeks, just like, cool, we're just gonna like double the number of like double the
Yeah.
size of the double the size of the event, or maybe like go up 4x on the size of the event or whatever because it played really well.
Yeah.
Versus like, oh man, this one like went really well, but this one didn't. Okay, great, let's double down on this one, and like we'll just cut bait on this guy. um we have a couple of questions that have been coming in here, and I've totally been spacing out, and so Elizabeth is yelling at me in the chat, to be a better moderator here. So Isaac had a really great question here, which is like, how do you manage meeting buyers and decision makers, in real life if they're spread out across the country? Like, how are your reps approaching that right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. Look, I mean, like any other sales cycle, right? I mean, you clearly need to identify who the players are, right? You need to identify who the influencers, you need to identify who the buyers are, understand, the different roles. And look, I mean, everybody knows at this point, buying happens in committees. So the answer is probably, it's not just one person, right? There's lots of
Many.
people. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, a handful.
exactly. Exactly. And look, there's dimensions to this because, one dimension is, look, for the sellers I have who are comfortable getting in front of a customer, like, we've had people ask, hey, are you open to an in-person meeting? And look, some of it might be, if we believe all the contacts are of equal importance, then let's figure out who's willing to meet us, in person. And if no one is, then, understand. The key in my mind is, look, this virtual selling, right, on a video is what we have for now, right? For now. So if that's the best tool we have as opposed to a phone call, then let's use it, right? Going back to what we talked about earlier around just, authenticity and being creative in your authenticity. Again, like, the background, little things. How can you leverage that and get people on a video call and turn their video? I mean, I I definitely feel more of a connection to customers and prospects that I've been able to at least get on a video chat with, more so than if I'm staring at like a bubble with two letters in it, and an initials, because,
Oh, that's the worst.
yeah. So I think that's not quite the type of connection necessarily that we strive to have. I mean, clearly, like everyone else, we want to be in person and we want to go out for beer. But if
But in the absence,
if this is the best we have, then let's take advantage of it, and let's let them see your face, and let them understand you're a human being. You're not two letters at the other end of a Microsoft Teams application.
Yeah, and I think what you can do is almost kind of like think about it as a mini marketing funnel as well, where like the first engagement might be a Zoom call or whatever, right? But then maybe the incremental engagement might actually be in real life.
For
right?
sure.
Like if you're in town, like it's kind of one of those things where it's like, this is really helpful for like, get on it right now. Oh, like we have to be there in like we have to have this conversation in the next 48 hours. Okay, well, I'm not gonna get on a plane right now, and like you wouldn't even like meet with me anyway. So we'll use Zoom in that situation. But right, like a month later, like maybe that got closed lost or whatever, we happen to be in Austin or LA or whatever, then you're kind of like one layer down
Completely agree.
the funnel.
Completely agree.
Right.
And I think what we've also done before, Pete, is leveraging leadership, right? I mean, look, I'm not in the same city as my team members. They're distributed all across, the West Coast, and, Chicago and Seattle and California. And, where companies are headquartered, to Isaac's point, right, isn't where everyone's physically located. So, we've even had scenarios here, like how can you leverage if you're in a team cell environment where you have maybe like a client director and specialists, or if you have, even, your sales leader that might be in a different physical location than you are. How can you leverage each other's physical location independently of each other to divide and conquer, right? In participation. And a good example of that is, we're working with some folks, up in Seattle going through a cycle right now. And the person who is what we'll call the client director, kind of the quarterback, is closer to that area, but there's a key stakeholder that's here in Austin. And I don't expect the client director to jump on a plane and come down here to Austin when I'm here and I have a team member here. So what did we do? We had my team member, who has actually physically located in Austin, say, hey, let's do this, right? Let's jump in and let's whiteboard. And that's the same situation I mentioned, earlier in the call, that was just maybe a week and a half ago. And the customer came back to us and said, man, this is really nice to be able to whiteboard and get in here. And this was so much more productive than it would have been if we tried to do this on the phone.
Interesting. So it's almost like a little bit of like a zone defense sort of thing.
Absolutely,
like,
man.
Here, like pick him up, right? Like he's leaving my zone. You pick him up, etc. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think a good question that came in, another kind of question that came in here around the signal data and kind of intent data there. Someone was asking a question about using intent data for outbound efforts. I know this isn't like super event centric, but obviously you can imagine that the like call to action payload of that outbound could be come to a dinner, come to an event, come to a digital event or whatever. What are the best ways of kind of leveraging intent and signal data for those outbound efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a fantastic fit for outbound efforts. And, best practices is, best practices at the end of the day, data is a means to an end, right? And, working at a data company, we try to tell the story every day that the data is fantastic as long as you have the means to activate it. And that means getting it meaningfully in a seller's hands for them to do something with it at the right time. Because again, data can very quickly go stale. So, in terms of best practices, it's, leveraging something like a CDP, right? To have that signal data funnel into a CDP where it's automatically matched to your prospect or your account list. And you have models, right, that are constantly running. Think of this as, you got a machine that's running inside of a CDP that's taking in all of this, data, exhaust data, intent data that's coming in. and only kicks out the good stuff. And that's the beauty of the process, is that, again, going back to helping sellers work smarter instead of harder, the idea is take in all of the data that's out there and kick something out, right, when it's ready for a seller to make a phone call, or when it's ready for a seller to do something with. And maybe it's not a phone call right out of the gate. Maybe you're going to, throw it in an outreach sequence, right, for the SDR and try to nurture it from there. There's, maybe it means that you're going to, use display advertising to try to warm them up a little bit before you have a seller reach out. These are all great, decisions that you can make. But I would argue that, from an outbound perspective, if you're going to be outbounding, then, all of these channels that you might be able to use, like let's drive some air cover for you folks who are doing the outbound selling. I mean, that's a tough job to do, right? Absolutely a tough job to do. And the more that marketing or someone else can do to help warm these things up, the more you're going to have a chance of being successful, right? How do we empower sellers to sell?
Yep. I think there was another good question here, which was, are the Longhorns ready for the SEC?
Well, I would have answered that question very differently a month ago. My perspective now, after 3 straight losses that were heartbreakers, to say the least, is we've got some more work to do.
But I guess the good news is that probably makes it such that the tickets are a lot cheaper if you want to do some client entertainment, right, around going to a football game, right? Now at least the CFO will be happier. The CFO will be happy happy about that. What sort of like have you been doing any sort of like local events, kind of like those micro events we were talking about locally there in Austin? I imagine like you're based there and it's probably within the territory of your team. Have you guys been doing anything like that?
We haven't been doing as much, and I think that's an area of opportunity, candidly, for us. And part of it also is, again, like the climate. I mean, going back to, again, a few months ago, I thought things were turning around and felt like customers were asking us to come in, and then suddenly we had this, Delta hit, and things went back the other direction. Now I'm feeling bullish again, like I'm starting to see the requests come in, and especially given the fact that, those who choose to have their children vaccinated, if you have young children, have the opportunity to do so now. I think that actually, could be pretty interesting to allow people with young children maybe to feel a little bit more comfortable in those types of scenarios. So I certainly expect that, going deeper into December and certainly into Q1, there's going to be a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pent up demand on the sideline. It's funny that you're saying that because, like, as I noted earlier, I have a bunch of my remote staff kind of in the office this week. We're having an office week, we took everybody out to this fantastic restaurant called Lamar on the Embarcadero here in San Francisco. If you're in town, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic for client entertainment. But what they've got is they've got this great back patio area with this kind of enclosed tent. And I think that's the other thing too, is that a lot of like restaurants, they've really done a good job of like architecting for things that like will make like everybody comfortable, if you will. And so I think what's funny is that like so we did that, and I think it was like 15 of my staff, and even just talking about it right now, I'm like, I should just run that play again, because we're Atrium's I think we have a few hundred customers, and a lot of, I mean, they're all over the United States, they're international, they're in Canada, what have you, but like we have a lot of customers who are kind of like modern software technology companies, so of course like very heavy in San Francisco. And I'm like, man, I should just like run that play again and just like hit our database and be like, yo, we just did this, and if you're open to it, it was really nice, it's outdoor, blah 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 blah, we'd love to see you, if you're comfortable with it. And like, if we get 15, great. If we get like 5, if we get 5, that's also good too. But it's just like, it's a known play that I just did with my staff. So like, why not just like do it? Because it'll be like, I mean, I think for us, it was like a couple grand or whatever. So like, it's worth like a G of investment just to kind of see what it looks like, right? You've inspired me, Chris. I'm going to get my act together.
Well, maybe I'm going to get my act together too, as you've inspired me as well, Pete. All right,
Pinky
here it
promise.
is.
We're gonna commit to doing some offline stuff. Well, I think that's kind of all the time that we had today. I think Elizabeth is gonna give us some logistics stuff here, and then take us home with her wonderful diva light that she has as well, as you can tell. Elizabeth, please tell us what to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris and Mike. We really appreciate having you here. It's been fantastic to have your insight on this subject, and thank you to everyone who attended today. The recording and key takeaways will be made available shortly. Be on the lookout for an email alert and feel free to share with your network. And again, thank you, Chris and Pete. It's been great. Thank you again to D&B for sponsoring this event, and stay safe, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day. See you next time.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you, Chris. Take care.